All right, it is 4:30 and I'm calling this meeting to order. I'd like to acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, Tla-o-qui-aht, and a notice to attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. And if there's no objection to adoption of the agenda, June 15th, 2021 Special Council agenda, I'll move adoption. Seeing no objection, motion's carried. Do we have public comment on agenda items? Ms. Best.
Thank you, Mayor Law. There are no attendees at this meeting, so we do not have any public comment.
Okay. Moving right on to correspondence. We have Minister of Municipal Affairs regarding 2021 UBCM Convention, Provincial Appointment Book and Meeting Request Process for meetings with provincial ministries, agencies, commissions, and corporations. We have a list of recommendations for minister meetings. Now, I know that some of you have comments on these, and I think now is probably a good time to quickly go over those things, because staff would like a directive, fairly clear directive, and if it's not possible here, then I think we can discuss it and come back to the next meeting, but fairly clear directive for these letters of request. First one is Finance, Minister of Finance. I know I've talked to Bob about this one, Mr. McPherson, about speaking with Minister of Finance, and I think we'd have a lot to talk about. Mr. McPherson, do you have a comment on this, the particulars of this one?
I don't have a comment on the particulars. The conversation that Mayor Law and I had was with respect to MRDT and any requests we might be making respecting the disposition of those funds. That's a decision that rests with Cabinet on recommendation of Minister of Finance. So that might be someone good for us to be in contact with, especially given the timing, as we will be getting close to our application date for MRDT program.
Perfect. We also have the Minister of Education, and this is when yes, Councillor Steer.
Yeah, and this may be directed to staff again, Mr. McPherson. In terms of the details of the meeting with the ministers and in this case the finance minister, if there's something else wanted to be added to that those agenda discussions, is this the appropriate time to bring that potential forward? AKA, we have talked about the MRDT, but also around parameters of the RMI and potential expansion of what those parameters might be used, those finances might be used for.
Through the mayor, if I may, the parameters of RMI that is Ministry of, actually lives with Ministry of, share between Ministry of Tourism and Ministry of Finance. So in the past, when we have worked with, had questions with Ministry of Tourism rather, I would suggest that would be something that we could put on agendas for both ministers, just kind of off the top of my head. And it may well be that one of them says, well, you need to talk to the other about it, but we can request up to 3 different topics for each 15-minute meeting. So if it's the desire of council to request a conversation with the Minister of Finance about that, then yeah, now is the time.
Through the mayor, thank you, Bob. And maybe I could put it out to the rest of council. I would certainly like to have that as one of the 3 topic items to speak with the Minister of Finance on. I'll look to the rest of council.
I'm happy with that. All right, seeing no objections, we'll have Ms. Best take notes. We have Minister of Education. Again, I wanted to bring up some some issues. We have a growing population. I wanted to encourage the Minister of Education to know what it's like to be here on the coast with limited resources and in some ways barriers to access for certainly some of our surrounding First Nations youth accessing high school, especially. A possible review of service here on the coast and effects on the community. I know we have, it's much like childcare, education on the coast, certainly in high school, access to many of the amenities that go along with that are sometimes sorely lacking here, and it's a reason for a lot of people leaving that people that do have homes and businesses here go elsewhere. And I'd like the Minister to know that. State of childcare. This did come up. Councillor Steer, you have a comment on this, and I know that Councillor Chalmers did talk to me today a little bit about this as well. But go ahead, Councillor Steer.
Well, right, I was just to confirm. I spoke with Councillor Chalmers regarding this, and she initially brought the topic forward, and that's why it is on the list here. And she was in conversation last night. We know it's a very topical issue. Most recently in our community, what has been for a while, but she was just wondering and was wanting to have it as a discussion with the rest of council if with the state of childcare conversation, if there was no specific ask that was involved, that if this was the appropriate venue to have that conversation, and she wanted it to be thrown out there to have a conversation with council. Otherwise, she had indicated to me that possibly to withdraw that particular request, but wanted it to come forward. If she was not able to attend it, she did want it to come forward to council to have a further conversation around that, knowing how topical it is, but specifically what we might be asking, because the issues are clearly so much broader issues that are involved around housing, affordability, etc. But in terms of the bringing forward of childcare, specifically in our community, she was wondering if that was the appropriate place and time to ask. So I don't know if there's any comments from council, and I wish Britt was here. but Mayor Law, I know that you did have some conversation with her today as well.
I did, and why don't I give you just the gist of what our conversation was, and part of it was when I put this on here, on the list here and threw it out there, was that to make the minister aware of the acute and critical nature of the lack of childcare on the coast and how that could potentially affect our community, service delivery, essential and critical services delivered in our community. And really, that was the object. The object when I put this out for consideration. And I do know that going back to the Ministry of Education, there is talk between the ministries of working on childcare. Perhaps moving it over to education or something like that. So I think those conversations together are extremely important for our community. And, maybe a letter is sufficient, but maybe a face-to-face would also help the, ministry realize what a dire situation it could be here in Tofino without adequate childcare. Yes, Councillor Thick.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think too that couldn't we take a little bit of time and after meeting with some of the parents perhaps, or having a meeting with them or amongst ourselves to further the conversation, we could develop our ask, or develop what it is we need to more clearly ask for. We don't need to get all of that in front of us now, but I would, as I understand it, but I would definitely concur that we need a face-to-face meeting, and a letter would not be sufficient at this time. So I would like to go forward with that. Thank you.
Any other comments on childcare? Mental health and addictions. This was quite a topic in our election. last couple elections actually, is the need for increase and expanded mental health services on the coast here. And I believe there's also moves from our First Nation community neighbors to request detox centers and other types of mental health and addictions infrastructure. So go ahead, Councillor Steer.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Law. Yeah, this is one where it's one of those where there will, I think it will be clear to articulate some of the three subject areas that we might, and so one of the things that we've been fortunate enough to have, believe it or not, is that we have had increased support services coming to the coast. One of the issues, once again, that comes up, we've had several support workers that do not have office space. They do not have the ability to come in. So housing is one of those critical issues that we know we need to discuss at all layers of government for sure, and mental health and addictions is one of them. So I would certainly like that to be one of the subject areas. In terms of the specific asks, I know that in conjunction with many of the service providers and certainly with our hospital staff, the detox center was one of those areas that was certainly a point of mine, and there were several others that we could articulate in that conversation. The other one, and it's going to be directly related to a request that I'm going to have at the end of there to meet with the Solicitor General, Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General, that it coexists with the issues around the most pressing regional health issue, that is substance abuse of alcohol. And there are some very related subjects between the two that will be brought up with the mental health and addictions, as well as I'm going to be requesting a meeting with public safety and the Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General. So it is an important one, and I think we'll be able to well articulate. There will be at least 3 points of discussion with the Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Steer. We have tourism, arts and culture. I felt this should get on here. we should. I think we get a lot of boost from the Ministry of Tourism and certainly arts and culture. And I think the arts and culture scene in Tofino is burgeoning. I'm not sure about a specific request on this one, but thoughts on this one from council?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need that meeting, and I think we can develop our talking points over the next few weeks, because we're going to be talking about all of these MRDT things, and so I think it's great. And I think it's Minister Melanie Mapp, is that right? Mark, sorry. And yeah, I think that she'd be very understanding and sympathetic to our needs and our cause here. So I definitely would like to have that meeting with her as the new minister for that.
And that was, and I believe Mr. McPherson, you did talk about the crossover and the link between the RMI program between Minister of Finance and Minister of Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture. So I just want to make sure that link is also recognized in the conversation. And we actually hope, sorry, did you have your hand up there, Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, I mean, the chances of getting the meeting improve a lot with if we can put forward something that's more clear, then we're going to develop our talking points. So also, we do have an arts and culture master plan. So we might want to pull some things out of that to present to the minister. But yeah, a more specific ask might improve our chances of getting a meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, that is actually, I was actually kind of hoping to have a conversation with council about this. So now would be the time to do it. Arts and culture, I do know that we have a large theater project coming up, and that's going to need a lot of bolstering, both in our community and I think with the ministry. So that, you know, stuff like that could be something that we could pitch to the minister, that we have, you know, significant art and culture projects on the way, and this is important to Tofino, and look for support from the ministry. Any other ideas? Now, this is another question here for Mr. McPherson, perhaps Ms. Best, is do we have time to revisit these specific requests at our regular council meeting coming up?
The deadline for the submissions is the end of the month. So the regular council meeting is the 23rd. So that does give us a bit of time after. It takes a little bit of time to put these together. The special challenge is that you're limited to the number of characters in each request. So it takes some very interesting wordsmithing at times, but yeah, we can, if council wants to refine these requests at the next council meeting, that's certainly fine. If I may also add, there's no need necessarily to have a specific request other than, we wish to update the minister about arts and culture in Tofino, and in particular, and I'm making things up, but in particular, the opportunities for improvement to the theater or something like that. We don't have to sort of ask for financial support or anything. It can be a request to bring people up to speed, and certainly early in my time here, those were typically what our ministerial meetings were like, is trying to reintroduce ourselves to the province and just get awareness of issues happening, so that in subsequent meetings we could have maybe more specific requests.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. McPherson. Now I have, is that good? Actually, honestly, when we were talking about this earlier, I think when I commented to or connected with council about this, I was thinking big picture, sort of the big picture ideas. So I think that's probably what the thoughts were at the time. But carry on now, Councillor Thick, you had your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, are we at the end of the list? And I had one more question.
We are not, actually. We've got health and Minister of Health. And I think this was had to do with a continued pitch for hospital and staffing resources on the coast for an expanded focus on staffing and also housing, because we're also at the risk of not being able to staff our essential and critical services, health services, without housing. And I think that's going to be increasingly important coming up in the next couple of years. Councillor Steer.
Yeah, and to further on that, I know at UBCM, for example, at 2018, where we had discussions with VHA specifically, and I don't know if that opportunity exists again. I think Mr. McPherson was at those conversations, and this is where I would say this is an ample opportunity. They are very familiar with the file of the request for the upgrades to the facilities, primary care facilities in Tofino. It's just a great time to reiterate those and bring forward those requests. And I don't know, Mr. McPherson, is the ability to have a one-on-one with VHA a possibility at this year's UBCM, virtual UBCM?
Through the mayor, typically those types of meetings are announced closer to the convention date. So I have not heard of them yet. They are typically they're a typical part of UBCM. So I don't know if they're going to be during the week prior, which is when the cabinet minister meetings are, or the actual week of UBCM. If they happen at all, but I can find out. It would surprise me if they were not.
Yeah, and if that was the case, certainly that one-on-one with VHA, who would be directly the ear to bend on that one for certain in our area. So I would add that as a request if that's possible. Thank you.
Super. All right, and the last one is Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resources, Operations, and Rural Development. And this is a bit of a late minute addition, and it has to do with the risks for, actually it has to do with the revetment process that's going on in Chesterman Beach. And just to let the minister know that, that we are watching this very closely. That it's very important to us, our beaches, and that this is an ongoing process, and we'll need close review both locally and at a provincial level, and also to discuss issues with accretion, which is, once the land grows up and when something happens and you've got trees and shrubs or whatever growing, that there's always the possibility that the landowners can apply to have that included in their private parcels. So that's something that I think as a community we should make the minister aware of our views. Certainly know my views, but I think this is something as a council we should probably talk about fairly soon. Councillor Steer and then Councillor Thick.
Thank you, Mayor Law. Yeah, and if and I'm not sure how much detail Ms. Best will need for this, but as one of the topic areas that is, since we did send a letter to the minister regarding the Old Growth Strategic Review, just an update and a discussion, a higher level discussion about the implementation of that Old Growth Strategic Review and where the province is at this time on that.
Very good point. That is it from my, oh, sorry, Councillor Thick. Sorry, you're up next. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just had one other request that I hadn't submitted in advance, but I'm wondering if it might be considered, and that it's a rather unusual one. And that is, I'm wondering whether there is a possibility to have a conversation with the Ministry of Environment. I think they're responsible for provincial parks. And I know this has never happened before, at least not in the times I've been to UBCM, but is there any way that we could have a joint meeting with the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation and the Ministry of the Environment? Because it seems to me that this question of provincial parks that are in the jurisdiction of some First Nations is, it seems to be a bit of a political football. We seem to be being asked to make these approaches and questions to the First Nations, but I think we need provincial leadership in this matter. And I would like to see that this community, as well as other communities on the coast, have access to those provincial parks in the year 21-22. So I don't know if that is possible. We've never asked that before, but I would, the problem is that when you meet with one ministry, they tell you one set of things. And when you meet with another ministry, they tell you another set of things. And the two don't talk to each other. So is there any possibility? Has it ever been requested? I don't know, but that would be something that I would like to see happen. Thank you.
That's a very, there you go. Mr. McPherson, I think you're on.
The format for these requests, it's actually, not a letter that we send, but it's an online form. You pull down and you select one minister. So there isn't really anything in this system for requests such as Councillor Thick has identified. If council would like to meet with, two ministries or two cabinet ministers at one time, that's something that we can look into, possibly in a different format. It might be something that our MLA could help us with. Mm-hmm. And we can see if we can pursue that another way, or we can request a meeting with one or both of those cabinet ministers at UBCM. But the meetings, in all likelihood, would be separate.
Right. Mm.
Go ahead, Councillor Thick.
Sorry. Yeah, well, I hear what you're saying, and I know the form doesn't allow that. I'm just simply asking the question, because it's all very well that it fits neatly for them. But what I'm saying is, this is a question that spans perhaps two jurisdictions, and we're kind of in the middle of it all. And how do we find out answers if we have to go to one and then to the other, and we have to tell the other what one said? And it's the same as tourism and the Ministry of Finance. It's the same kind of a question that we have you know, got to meet with one, then we're going to meet the other, and then tell one what's, you know, it's just we're talking about collaboration, we're talking about reconciliation, we're talking about having hard conversations and asking questions. So I'm asking the question, that's all. And I think it's a valid one to consider. So it may not be possible, but there's the question from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thick. I wonder how we would approach this as a issue in itself. You know, is there a way to move forward and ask the ministry about this question? Like, is this possible, and what format would we do that in? I'm not sure.
And to your point, to the CAO's point, I think that Ministry of Municipal Affairs they're the ones that are convening these meetings, and it happens that this person who's the minister is our MLA. So I think to the CAO's point, I think it would be very good to ask, you know, is this possible? Has it ever been done before? I mean, the fact is we're on Zoom, so it's actually much more potentially possible. And is our MLA willing to consider that, or could it be considered, and could it happen? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thick.
So if council would like, I can make contact with our MLA's office and ask, you know, their advice on the best way to approach something like this. When we met with our MLA previously, and I believe Councillor Thick raised this issue or one very similar to it. I think the feedback that we had was go and talk to the nation whose territory the park is in. So if we're going to be talking with the provincial government, I think they're going to be looking for what the views are of either House-it or Tla-o-qui-aht or wherever the jurisdiction of that park lies. So that might be something that we want to get ourselves a little bit prepared on as well locally, and then start those discussions with the province.
I think that's a good idea. I think that sounds like a great idea, reaching out and looking for some feedback. Would council like to direct staff to carry on with that?
Can move the resolution or the motion. Is that
Well, I was looking for a directive to staff on that particular comment, to reach out to the our MLA. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we need a motion for that, but I would like to have no. But as long as council is all in agreement and Mr. McPherson is aware, perfect. Go ahead then, Councillor Thick.
I'd like to move the recommendation that staff be directed to make requests on behalf of council to arrange meetings at the 2021
Through the mayor, Councillor Thick, I think Councillor Steer wanted to add one more item.
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt.
Councillor Steer, I missed your hand there. Go ahead. You got to put your mute off. Mute. The rookie move.
I know, but it wasn't allowing me to do it. Then it flashed up on my screen. Here, push here. Thank you, Mayor Law. Yeah, I did have one last request that was not forwarded here because the formulation of this came late into the game, and I do apologize if council would entertain. One of the last requests, and it ties in with the discussion that I mentioned earlier with the Ministry of Addictions and Substance Use. It's a meeting with the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General, and it's in regards to two things. One, as they are in charge of the modernization of the Emergency Program Act, and which has been central to some of the discussions that we've been having here over the last several years. And I would like to have a discussion with the Solicitor General around that. In past UBCM, we had the opportunity, and this relates back to a question I'd have for the CAO again that he just answered. We had the ability to speak with Parliamentary Secretary Rice, whose portfolio this included. And so I would like to speak to the Solicitor General because there's another point that is related to the other point that I'd like to bring up around. One of the things that has come forward during the pandemic was legislation to allow for the, two parts to it, was for the wholesale cost to restaurants and pubs and to allow liquor delivery with takeout. And there's been a request in a lobby to make that a permanent legislation. And I'd like to comment to the Solicitor General how there is a very large body of evidence from their own ministry, as well as the University of Victoria Substance Use Research Center, where this would be a very, very bad step moving forward in terms of the mental health and addictions, with alcohol being the #1 issue in our region specifically, but most certainly within the province. So I did want to have a discussion with the minister about being careful about looking at that legislation moving forward. And I would like that included in our submission to the ministers.
I'm happy with that. Council, go ahead, Mr. McPherson.
Yeah, that's fine. We can put that request in. Just wondering where, and we make these and we have to tell which is our priority. So would this be before, after mental health and addictions? Around that spot in order of priority? Our fourth priority, third priority?
I'll look at the priority.
Councillor Steer, it's #1.
Yeah. See, that's a bad question to ask me, because I would put it up there very high on the list for me. It would be up there near #1. So I certainly could see it falling in behind mental health and addictions, but I would certainly bump it up to underneath education. There's finance education. I would even have it directly under finance if that seemed appropriate. But I would leave that up to council to delineate where that might fit best, knowing where I stand on it.
Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Steer, I'm just wondering if that might work as a letter to the Minister of Public Safety, just on the delivery, and then we could bring the issue up also with the mental health and addictions and reiterate that we wrote a letter.
Yeah, my only fear with that, Councillor Anderson, is that the expediency of this, that this is coming forward very quickly, and that the input process, I think it would be appropriate, because it's a much broader issue that does link directly with many of the services mental health and addictions is providing. Within the minister's mandate letter, which I have in front of me, there are several references to working with the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions to address the issues around mental health and addictions, specifically at the municipal level. So I think it would be an appropriate conversation to be having face-to-face with the minister at this time, as opposed to a letter.
Okay, great, thanks.
If you know what, if you have, I think you've got a very specific ask, and you've got a very, very specific issue here, Councillor Steer. So I'd be willing to put this up, up near the top. I have no problem with that. I mean, honestly, I made this general hierarchy here myself, so I'm willing to have people speak up.
Thank you, Mayor Lowe.
So let's put it near the top. I think I'm fine. Anybody, you wanted it second, did you, Councillor Steer? Nobody else has asked. Nobody else has asked for anything specifically, so I think we're fine. No, except for finance. Finance should be #1, and then
it should be definitely #1, because they hold the purse strings for everything, and so we definitely want to talk to them first, as we often are asking them to loosen that purse string on many, which affects many of the decisions that come underneath. So yes, I would agree, Mayor Lowe.
That's fine. We can put it second then. We'll bow to your passion here, Councillor Steer. Okay. Is that it? I also had, I had thought of Ministry of Public Safety. That's okay. We'll carry on from here. Go ahead, Councillor Thick, and finish the motion.
Well, since our discussion, then we have to rewrite the motion to include not only the Attorney General then, but what about the conversation we just had about the Indigenous Relations and Ministry of Environment? Do we need to add all of these too?
Well, I think we wanted to get direction from our MLA on how to approach those together. I think because it's kind of asking for a meeting with two ministries together. It's kind of outside of the actual, what Mr. McPherson said about the actual ask, and these are online forms that we have to fill out a specific way. So my thinking was that we would go ahead and approach the MLA on that one, and that this one here from Councillor Steer is a specific ask to a ministry. So I do think your request there, Councillor Thick, is very important, and I think we should do that. Just how to do that is the issue here.
Okay. With nods from the rest of council, we have a friendly amendment then to put the Solicitor General request underneath finance when I read the motion. Am I correct?
Through the mayor, yes.
So that's the only addition, and everyone's nodding, so we're going to add.
Go ahead, Councillor Steer.
Yeah, and just for clarity, Councillor Thick, when making, it is the Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General.
Okay.
And and I think actually, I think between now and next week there might be a little bit of we'll work on some of the language of these requests.
Mm-hmm.
And just before we carry on, Councillor Thick, I just want to ask if you are comfortable with that your question was answered about having a joint meeting between the Parks and the Ministry of Reconciliation, Indigenous Affairs, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'd like to move the recommendation that staff be directed to make requests on behalf of council to arrange meetings in the 2021 Union of British Columbia Municipalities Convention with the following ministers in order of preference: the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General, Ministry of Education, Ministry concerning State of Childcare, Mental Health and Addictions, Tourism, Arts and Culture, Health and Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any further comments? All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. All right, now we have a fairly significant presentation and report from Mr. Fraser, Beach Pay Parking Program Procurement Update.
Thanks, Mayor Law. Good evening, Council. My name is Fraser Work. I'm the Director of Infrastructure and Public Works for the District of Tofino. Tonight, I'd like to take Council through a brief PowerPoint presentation which illustrates the content of the report that's before Council for consideration, which is about entering into procurement arrangements and agreements with a proponent that has been selected as the preferred proponent for third-party parking services, especially as those relate to pay parking at the beach locations and at the downtown municipal hall parking lots. I'll share my screen at this stage, and I'll be able to go through what is about 7 or 8 slides, substantive slides. Nikki, could you please enable my screen sharing?
Through the mayor, I should be working there for you, Mr. Work. Just
Okay.
about now. Yes.
Sorry for my familiar use of your first name. All right, let's see if I can go here. It might give me the, okay, yep, I'm up and running. All right, so I'll go in presentation mode. Just, oops, sorry, I froze and then it accelerated like mad. Can everyone see? I saw some nodding heads. Okay, so everyone can see with presentation. Okay, thanks, Mayor and Council. The purpose of this report is to seek your direction and approval to enter into third-party contract for parking services with Robbins Parking Service Limited for a 3-year term with options to renew. The challenges that we face in our current parking realm include are listed on the left, which is some information that's been before council before recently, but just a summary for those that might be joining us for the first time or watching for the first time, which is very high demand, limited supply, lack of enforcement, some inefficient use of available space, commercialization and privatization of public good, some inequities across access to those public space amenities, abuse and issues with the parking rules and regulations, impacts to public safety in and around parking, wear and tear on public infrastructure, a lack of alternatives for both larger recreational vehicles or sustainable mobility alternatives, and a high relative cost to operate and maintain the infrastructure without revenues thus far, or without significant revenues thus far. By way of background, just since our last discussions on the 26th of April, we have completed an RFP process and received 2 compliance submissions of the 3 that did attend the mandatory site visit. Those were compared, and it was deemed that the submission from Robbins Parking had the highest value and benefits to our community. Public engagement continues to shape and influence the final design of the parking system, which will continue past tonight's decision. The summary of services that are offered through this arrangement are highlighted on the list at the left, and they apply to the locations on the right, which we've discussed several times prior to tonight. The introduction of physical pay stations, enhanced or augmented by both digital web-based applications as well as phone payment systems. So that provides 3 different payment options for locations. It also includes, of course, the financial management side of the business of transactions to support pay parking fee for service. The suite of enforcement and dispute resolution and management functions, an online permitting system that can be expanded over time to include different permits for different user groups. It includes web-based portals and information, of course, that will interface with the public, data and reporting, as well as the fee structure for the management of the system provided by the third party. The deliverables have been summarized in the report and have been listed here, also are included in an appendix, which is the terms and conditions. And I'll just review these quickly for everyone's review. So we have been engaging and discussing, of course, the targeted staffing and community benefits, and it is likely that this system as written today will start with 2 full-time jobs, 1 supervisor, 1 parking ambassador / enforcement officer, and 1 part-time. So 3 total, but 2 full-time equivalents. And those would be staffed using local resources. So that would essentially create 2 good careers with 1 part-time job, which is obviously an intention of these types of programs. We have rested currently on the allocation of 6 kiosks at 5 locations only, and the other locations to be covered by the digital phone-based solutions. The kiosk locations are Cox Bay Maltby having 2 pay stations, physical pay stations, because it's a large surface area to cover quite a large volume of parkers. The Municipal Hall surface lots, so if I was to, jump around a little bit, as well as the North and South Chesterman locations, and that is it. So do I have them all there? So 2 at Cox Bay Maltby, 1431. Of course, I always pass by 1431, which will also include a pay station. And the Hellison and Tonquin Park Road locations would be served by the phone-based and the digital web-based applications to start at least, and we would review those on an annual or more frequent basis as required in case we wanted to introduce more infrastructure at those locations, but staff at this time are recommending the numbers I've outlined. The parking rules and rates are flexible within the terms of the contract, but have suggested initial starting points that have been outlined in the report, as well as the approach for notices and infractions. Includes the design and development of websites that start with landing pages and are linked to our Tofino district web pages, and then to progress down through different management functions or transaction types of functions, you may be directed to a site that would be owned by the third-party service provider. The online permit system, again, which would be splash paged or linked through our different pages, and then you would end up completing such registration via the third-party service system, which would have a Tofino look and feel. The monitoring and the enforcement regime has initially been set at 14-hour per day coverage in the summertime, with a bit of a relaxation in the wintertime to account for seasonal effects. And a lot of discussion thus far about how we would align the enforcement with a more guest services and ambassadorial function to make sure that we support the needs of the parking publics and the visitors, and make sure that they are supported by what would be an employee of this program area to make sure that they could get to where they needed to go and have help along the way. The service fees have been identified in the contract and have been outlined in the report, and I'm more than happy to go into specifics there as required. The considerations that I've outlined, or staff have outlined in the report, include the careful balancing of a list of what we would say are requirements for a successful system. And in order for us to maximize the benefits across all those, we have to trade off and compromise in certain areas. I highlight this mostly just to illustrate to council and the public that in order for us to introduce a low cost and initially a simple system, we would of course take less revenues from the overall program. We also, in some cases, may not achieve shifts to sustainable mobility and that kind of thing once we have, unless we have the right rates set, which we're recommending going in at lower rates to start at least, but we would want to keep those things in mind as we move forward and look at balancing these elements over time. In some cases, prioritizing certain of these elements in this list above others. To start, we've tried to take a very pragmatic approach to align the program with change management principles of simplicity and easing into the system, but that also should be considered against what we want to be able to do here, which is have the behavior shift and an organized parking system which abides by the rules and doesn't extend negative externalities onto the other users of the road and these amenities. So that's really what the discussion points there try to suggest or illustrate, which is careful balancing is required to maximize across all of these. And in some cases, we would not be able to maximize all, and we'd have to carefully step through those over time as we review and refine the system each year. The next steps recommended by staff through the report is to, with council's direction for approval, we would of course finalize the contract details and move forward with ongoing public engagement and ongoing parking system design and development and testing, especially things like the online permitting system and the registration system is subject to a bit more design and development as well as testing. As an example, we would be in a position to return back to council in the coming weeks with the associated changes in the bylaw to reflect this new program and have a chance to review that with council for considerations prior to adoption. We would be able to report more comprehensively about the outcomes related to the public engagement that continues even regardless of where we are on the decision points of this contract. That will still continue meaningfully. And then we would look at the implementation program, which I bookended here with communications in an effort to illustrate that there'll be communications along the way that will kind of migrate from what is now mostly about education awareness and discussion about the merits, the concerns, the challenges with the paid parking system. And communication somewhat will change when we look at implementation and require to communicate with people and direct them to things like an online registration system. That's a very sort of discrete and specific set of communications that have to happen so people know what to do and when to do it and how to do it so that they can be successful as registering in the system and enjoy the services of which they subscribe. So we would move forward with all of that planning and implementation activity. That concludes the presentation, which just reflects the sort of content in the report today, and I'll stop sharing so that the group can be back on screen and I'll take any questions from council. I would note, of course, I should have said at the beginning that the CAO might wish to provide some color commentary at the end of my slides, just so that my voice is not the only one that everybody's hearing, and it gets a bit of a balanced perspective with his commentary.
Not a great deal to add here. This is a project that's been discussed for a long time. I think that we had what I would say is a very successful RFP call, and have had very good discussions with Robbins Parking about how this could be implemented. I'd like to emphasize Robbins has really approached this in the last couple of weeks as trying to partner with us and really trying to become part of the community. From a branding perspective and front public facing perspective, we want to have this be as seamless as possible with Tofino's operations. So the look and the feel of everything is going to be Tofino, not Robbins. Much like the parking behind Municipal Hall is operated by Robbins, but it's a municipal lot. And that's the kind of thing we want to continue. We're having very creative discussions about the work that these parking ambassadors can do to be, do more than issue warnings and tickets, and actually try to be a presence on the beach that puts a very good face of the district forward, doing some things that actually provide public service on an ongoing basis. So this is something that we could not undertake with our own forces, could not undertake with our own technology. And we're I think in a good spot to have Robbins as a potential partner on this.
Thank you, Mr. McPherson. I think what I'm going to do here, because I know this is a hot topic, parking, and is to sort of parse out some of the questions. And for the first round of questions, if there are any, I assume there are, I certainly have some. Let's would like to focus on the proposal that's put forward by Robbins and the agreement that we have here, and if there are any questions around that specifically, and then maybe we can go off and talk about other issues of pay parking going forward and how that's going to look. So I do have a couple questions. One, I started off, and this is just simply about the contract and what happens if Robbins Parking, we sign the contract, Robbins Parking can't fulfill their obligations because they can't hire people, they can't house people, and that becomes an issue. What happens then with the contract, and how does that look? And I'm going to ask a couple here. Also, there was some other costs in this agreement that weren't delineated, such as towing costs or various costs that are kind of seem to be up in the air, and I just wanted to know about those. Those will be hopefully those will be specifically outlined, so there wasn't any unknown costs that the district would be on the hook for without knowing beforehand. And one final thing, that's two, sorry. My final question is about disputes, because Robbins Parking, I've had experiences with Robbins Parking, and it was hard, and I would hate for people. We've got a great brand here in Tofino. We're a friendly, approachable town, and I would like to keep that going. And so I know in the contract it says there's a complete autonomy with Robbins in the dispute section, which I would agree with, but what if there comes a point where issues with parking or disputes with parking become an issue with our town? So those are three questions.
Through the mayor, I can start and then make sure that I pause for the CAO to chime in as required. The first question about what happens if Robbins isn't able to get up and running. Based on the short timeline, we have talked a lot about some of the risks associated with hiring staff and the right staff and making sure that infrastructure is put in place. Robbins have made commitments that they will do their best to get staff hired as quickly as possible, but they don't necessarily want to compromise on quality there. And they're making arrangements to provide the levels of service using imported temporary resources until they can actually have hired the local resources that would be their steady state employees for this particular parking system. They're seeking to hire local, which would alleviate any requirements for finding housing for a new imported person that would be moving to Tofino. So they're very keen and focused on creating good jobs here in town for people that already are here. So they have provided a series of sort of strategies and mitigations and have given us the assurance that they'll be able to support the timeline even on an interim basis. I don't think we have a clause in the contract to suggest that if they weren't able to provide services, what would happen, but we have the flexibility in our cancellation clause to walk away with a certain amount of warning. I think it's 60 days right now, which we're just finalizing some of the language there. So I think that for that question, we've been given a reasonable set of assurances, and I think that for the most part, we have the clauses that are necessary to protect ourselves. I'm not sure if Mr. McPherson would like to add anything on that question. It might be best just for us to both have a chance to answer each one before we go to the next.
Yeah, just added a wee bit of color. Fraser referenced imported labor. The group of supervisors and managers from Robbins who we've been talking to are planning on rotating through Tofino, like each taking a week here, to get themselves familiar with the operation, to make sure the operation is working well. So what they want to be starting with is some seasoned parking professionals getting themselves on the ground here. This is we are a very important client to them, and they really want to deliver the right service, which maybe I can kind of leapfrog ahead to the dispute question, because I think that talks about the kind of service that they want to deliver. And that's been a part of a significant part of the discussions that we have had. And at the end of the day, they are a manager. They don't typically own parking lots, as most parking providers don't own parking lots, and take direction from whoever their client is. So, without giving too much away, we've talked very much about a white glove kind of service where we're going to be have very high tolerance levels and forgiveness levels built into the system early on, and the direction we're trying to give is like fines aren't really the economic side or the financial side for this. The parking fees are. Now, if we have someone who's a scofflaw and doesn't want to pay and is beyond rude when we have conversations with them, I guess that there's a sort of a lower level of forgiveness. But what we are, the direction that we are developing and going to provide through, essentially a project charter is that this is meant to be managed in a way that is befitting of this community rather than a faceless crown corporation or something.
Through there, I might add just that we can, or just emphasize the point that we spend a lot of time talking about how do we balance fair and reasonable in a way with the brand of the West Coast, and avoid what would be interpreted as many as a sort of a cold and immovable corporate response on the enforcement side of things, but also not put ourselves in trouble where we were seen to be pushovers and taken advantage of by other parkers. It's important to note that with an annual pass and a free pass subscription service, which is unlike many parking systems in other centers, where you're really only talking about transaction versus transaction versus transaction, for a lot of our local residents who subscribe to the annual pass, enforcement will become almost a non-existent issue, essentially, when it comes to, can I park here on this date and this time? And it becomes more of a focus for the visiting public in many regards. It's a consideration for council. If I moved on to the other costs through the mayor, we have talked about the rates and the lists in all of our deliberations, and are written down in the terms and conditions for maximums for towing and these other eligible costs that have been listed out. There's several in there, and while we still develop the contract language, we'll make sure that those are all upfront and defined so that we're not in a position to negotiate those on the fly. I think that may cover all three questions.
That's my three to start everybody off there. I'm sure other people have some questions for Mr. Work. Councillor Thick, and then I believe it was Councillor Steer and Councillor Anderson in a tie. So maybe we'll go with age, maybe, but then you have to tell me who's older. I don't know. Councillor Thick, go ahead.
Thank you, Fraser Work, for the report and for all the work that both of you have put into this. And I did have a few questions, as Mayor Law said. If we just start off with the questions in regards to the contract, which was delineated in our package, but maybe not so well in the presentation we just heard. I'm just thinking about the pay stations, and you said in the report and in your presentation that there's 6. And so it leaves Tonquin and Mackenzie without pay stations. Am I correct? And so I'm concerned about the fact that there's, at Tonquin, I'm not sure if everyone in the district is aware, but there's very limited, if no cell service at all at Tonquin parking lot. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So I'm very concerned about that and the fact that there could be a big spillover effect from the other parking areas that will be more strictly monitored. And I think there'll be a huge spillover effect to Mackenzie and to Tonquin, which has only got 10 or 12 parking spots with a limited cell service. So people could argue, well, we don't have any cell service there, so I couldn't get this. Are the pay stations being driven by the District of Tofino, the number, or is it being driven by a cost-effective measure by Robbins? That's one of my questions about the pay stations and why maybe Tonquin and Mackenzie. I realize they're not such high volume, but I think if we don't do each beach, it's all or none for me. And I think that we need to look at that. So that's a question I had. Also, the free parking. I noticed in the Banff report, which they're rolling out as we speak as well, that they very clearly in their website, they delineate where you can park for free. And they talk about a shuttle to downtown. And we don't really know right now, do we, that whether the shuttle is going to be working or not. But at one point in our conversations, we talked about, actually encouraging people to park at the community hall for free. I mean, that does provide a large number of spaces and it provides potentially free access. It might be the only place, for example, that you could get free access to Tonquin Beach. So that might be something to think about. If we're going to encourage compliance, I think we need to think about what are we offering people who are either on low income or limited. How can they park? They might have to walk 10 minutes, but how can they park for free? And what can they do for free? Thirdly, the monthly fee I find it quite high, the 5.5% of net revenues, which according to my calculations would be about $313,000 a year. So if we're looking to sign a potential contract for $3 to $5 million, and we're saying that we're going to be paying for these services, why is it that we need to pay this extra revenue proportion, and is this negotiable? So those are a couple of my questions to start with, and then I have a couple of bigger picture questions later. Thank you.
Through the mayor, I'll start off. It may actually be easier if we just answer one question at a time, just because there's quite a bit of material and content in there, and I don't want to ill-serve the response that council deserves. So I'll maybe throw that suggestion out there. It's council's expectations. So I think the first question was encapsulated as what's driving the pay station locations and design. There's a few considerations, and the Tonquin and the Hellison Drive were debated internally as well as with Robbins. Each pay station adds a cost to the district to purchase or to rent, as well as to maintain, as well as to service with power and potentially the operations and maintenance that goes along with both the kiosk that wraps around it in the future, as well as the station itself. So it adds direct costs to what we would call what the charges would be each year to the district, and it also adds somewhat less tangible but indirect costs for operating and maintaining that might fall to district forces. The considerations around whether we should put infrastructure like a physical pay station at Tonquin Park Road and Hellison was influenced by the number of spaces that they serve and the relative cost-benefit ratio, as well as if it fit in the natural infrastructure landscape at that zone, as well as how easy it was to power if the solar generation and a battery charger wouldn't work necessarily because of the foliage and the cover across the top of the canopy, the tree canopy, and solar wasn't an option. In some cases, we may have to also think about installing phone or tele services to augment the wireless capabilities that would be part of the machines. And we batted that against the other options that we have to pay, and whether that was reasonable for the paying public. So in this case, we're looking at offering both a digital payment system via a smartphone application, as well as a 1-800 number that would take a payment of a credit card read over the phone by a person that wanted to pay, as well as being able to pay for a parking spot at that location at a kiosk that would be nearest to that spot, which would be the one at the community hall. Obviously less convenient unless you were planning for that as you were going, but still an option nonetheless. So in many cases, these types of locations only have one option, and when you get there, and that's to pay by a machine, whether that's a tap or credit card insert or a coin insert. In this case, we're offering these other two options, the 1-800 number as well as the Honk mobile option. So all that on balance supported an argument to not start with a pay station at Tonquin or Helleson and try it for a little while, and in order to save money, to save infrastructure cost, to save the spot and maybe the visual impact that a pay station might have on an otherwise wilderness type of setting, and to go with those other digital phone and 1-800 number applications, and then assess as we go and monitor. We did talk about the lack of cell service and whether that would be an issue, and it still had to be tested, but essentially on balance, the argument sort of fell there. It wasn't a slam dunk by any means, even internally with that discussion, but that was the rationale that led to the initial phase of actually only having the phone-based types of purchasing applications locally. CAO, did you want to add anything there?
Not much to add. If we wanted to add a pay machine, to be clear for council, that's something that would be done, and it would affect the number, the monthly fee number that is noted in the appendix to the report. So it's another way of putting it is the more machines we have, the more comes out of our end of this transaction. So Robbins would put 400 machines out there if we wanted them, but it would cost, each increment costs us more.
If council wishes me to go on, I would ask for a clarification on what spillover effect meant. Councillor Thick, I wasn't exactly sure what the concern was in that regard.
Well, as you know, on a busy day in the summer, you can have 50 cars here and it completely blocks the road. So because it's one of the busiest wedding locations in Tofino, I think it's going to be exploited because if people can get away with something because they say, oh, I didn't have cell service down there, or whatever other excuse they want to make because there isn't a pay station there, I think that Tonquin and Helleson are going to be very much negatively affected. And I think that there's going to be a huge I think there's going to be an uproar from the neighborhood here if the parking continues all the way up the hill, which has been the case in the last summer that we've had and previous summers, and mostly, as you know, has to do with weddings at this location. So I'm just saying, I think the spillover effect when you don't have a pay station and there isn't self-service 100% guaranteed, I think it's going to be the place where people go because they can argue their way if they do get a ticket. Well, obviously it's not going to be as well patrolled, but because of the lesser number of spots, but also I think people are going to argue their way out of that much more easily.
Through the mayor, I'm more than happy to go back to Robbins and talk about the enforceability sort of concerns or considerations there. It is important to highlight that, of course, all of these locations would be fall within the enforcement map that would be subject to the same levels of enforcement using the same technologies of LPR. But I do take your point that if Robbins felt like it was, I think we could probably go in there, test the self-service, and test the applications of the different phone and 1-800 numbers, and see if certain service providers, like if Fido was different from Rogers, was different than so-and-so, was different than so-and-so, and assess it. But I would like to make sure and emphasize for council that the enforcement will occur at all locations using license plate recognition in the vehicle. And we wouldn't be focusing just on the busiest locations with the most spots. It would be a set of rounds that they would be doing very regularly during the 14-hour periods. The third question, the second question through the mayor, Councillor Thick, second question about would the district be providing more guidance on free parking alternatives and how would the shuttle play into this? We have discussed this a bit before, and I of course agree that the alternatives for free access to the community hall parking, Councillor Thick and I have talked about this on the ground as well, are important parts. The signage, as well as what's on our website and what's communicated to the traveling public, are really important parts of the overall success of the parking system. So that has to be part of our planning and our implementation program. The shuttle is planned to start and commence running on the 28th of June, which will provide a service that Tofitians have been used to in years previous to COVID. And all of those will be updated in our public commentation. So we have, like we talked about at the last workshop, that there's a number of physical improvements and different things that have to take place at each location that are outside of the scope of this contract, but that are fall to the district staff to implement as per discussions and decisions from council previous to today. And we wish to achieve those same types of things, which is clarity and options for the public. The last question, which is whether or not the 5.5% revenue is high. We've advertised in this report a conservative estimate of earnings versus expenses for the contract in effort to make sure that we don't overpromise and underdeliver, and also that it is a new program that will evolve over time, and we aren't sure, and we won't really have a track record until we develop some experience in this space of how the parking system earns. And but we're talking mostly about costs here. The 5.5% revenue and the overall cost of delivering the set of program objectives that were identified in the request for proposals were the most competitive that were provided from the marketplace. Whether somebody else that didn't bid could have done it for cheaper, I guess we don't know that, and we may not know for this generation of services. And I think if council needs some additional assurance on how competitive that price is just writ large when other municipalities and what rates that they currently enjoy, I would have to go back to talk with the CAO and with Robbins and potentially some other stakeholders to understand what those are and commonplace publicly available data. But I would just emphasize that that the market did respond here, and we're presenting what we feel is the most suitable and most beneficial set of responses from the market. Bob, did you want to add to that at all?
Not significantly, just from previous experience in the parking world. Fees, I think Fraser alluded to, generally reflect they can float with the overall revenue. So yeah, as Fraser said, at the end of this contract, we may be in a better position to say, well, this revenue was more than expected, if that is the case, and then have discussions with Robbins, with others about how the fee can be structured. At this point, we're working with what the response was we got from the parking industry.
Through the mayor, that's all I have on that particular set of questions. Do we want to? Is there any points there that we would like to keep discussing, or would we like to? However, you'd like to proceed.
I just was going to look around the room and see if other councillors had something to say again about the. Go ahead, Councillor sorry, Councillor. I believe actually, sorry, we had Councillor Anderson and then Councillor Steer and then Councillor McMaster.
So we're. My question was around vandalism costs. We did have some issues with vandalism the first time, a long time ago, when we tried to implement paid parking. And I noticed the contract, the district would pay for the vandalism costs. I'm just wondering what sort of, do we get some say in what sort of kiosk we have, if they have security measures or anti-tampering measures, or do we sort of have to take what Robbins offers? I wouldn't mind if we had fairly secure kiosks with possibly with cameras or and good sturdy units. So any comments on that, since the district is on the hook for vandalism?
So Robbins did specify a particular parking meter in their proposal. Maybe I'll just back up a second. I know that when parking was rolled out, or I'm told that when parking was rolled out 14 years ago, there were some issues. The parking meter that we have presently in Tofino. My recollection was that we had no vandalism, no tampering with the machine in the 5 years that it's been there. Sorry, 4 years that it's been there. I confirmed that with our contractor. It has not had we have not had an issue. So the optimist in me hopes that we're in a different place as a community than we may have been 14 years ago. So the machines that were proposed, I did go to my contacts in the parking world and inquired about those machines. They're what I expect are what I am given to believe are very reliable machines. And again, the parking machines have probably come a long way in the last 14 years in terms of tamper-proof. Now, there isn't a parking machine in the world that's going to dissuade someone who's determined to do damage. They do have alarms built into them. So there is an alarm system that, it will notify the attendant if as it's running out of paper. It will also notify if the machine experiences a shock, and that can trigger quick intervention if needed. The question, I'll address graffiti. The machines that we're looking at now, they have there's like an anti-graffiti coating that's put on them, so that if they are tagged, it's something that wipes off much more easily than machines that we may have seen years ago. What was the final thing I was going to mention? If at some point in time we find that the coin slot is tampered with, we can choose to get out of the coin accepting business. The ability to get into the money reservoir in modern machines is exceptionally difficult. This is hardened steel that's bulletproof to many ordinances. And very, I would say, very, very tamper-proof. So, there's nothing. If someone decides they want to drive a D9 dozer into it, I guess there's not much we can do about that. But I have a pretty good level of confidence that these machines are as good as we're going to do in the industry.
Thank you. The other question I had was there was no mention of signage. So I'm assuming that the district is paying for all the signage and locating it and all that kind of work. And then just on that as well, in the past, when the district implemented new parking, and I don't think it was pay parking, but we just changed parking, it actually took a whole summer to be able to fill our order for signage. So we weren't able to implement a plan at one point just because of supplying signage in time. So it's sort of a warning, and I guess that hopefully we won't run into that problem.
Through the mayor, I can just comment on that. We're constantly ordering signs for different uses in and around town, and we've identified the timeline risk on the signage. The district talked about this with the different service providers about retaining control over signage to make sure that the look and feel of the signs may reflected for all where the information postings go about how the pay parking system works, the directions and the information for the different traveling public was on our brand rather than a brand that we would have to potentially negotiate through with the service provider, as well as we wanted to minimize the vertical infrastructure and have a say in how the signage was going to reduce clutter and to optimize across the other needs with on the other side of the pole when you have another sign that you need to do or to actually identify or communicate with the public on different types of issues. So we're working with Robbins. They've identified a signage plan as part of their submission for the RFP, and what kind of content and what kind of information they deem is required to communicate to the public and make sure that those are clear instructions and sets of guidance, and also the different locations that will be most prominent so that we can defend our tickets and have a compliant transaction set. So we have tagged the ordering risks, and we will continue to work that carefully. And but at this stage, we'll maintain control over the signage to fulfill a couple of different of our interests at the district.
Okay, thank you. I have no more questions. Couple comments. So I'm really happy with the ambassador approach. And also the willingness to work on sharing the information about marketing initiatives. And so I'm hoping that we can expand bicycle parking at the beaches and advertise our shuttle a little more through cooperating with a user, or pardon me, a provider of parking. Okay, that's all I have right now.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Go ahead, Councillor Steer.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Wirtz and Bob and Ms. McPherson for a very comprehensive report. And I recognize the amount of time and energy that has gone into creating this. I have 3 questions, and I'll do one at a time. And one of the first ones is related to the fixed annual management fee of approximately $280,000. And I know that often in these government situations where revenues are maybe overextended and costs are underestimated, that I'm curious as to, with this fixed fee, I know that the estimates are high for revenues, but if that fixed fee was not manageable with the revenues that were incoming, is the district responsible for coming to the rescue, so to speak, for that fixed management fee?
Through the mayor, I can start. I think we have had some discussions with Robbins about, of course, their seasonal enforcement approach, which is a large factor, staffing costs in their fixed annual fee, and going down to what we expect right now is a reasonable set of resources, a little bit lower than what we would see in the summertime. We also have talked about the ability to influence how we, when and how we sort of ratchet down resources and how we approach those different types of things. I would have to go back and talk a little bit more internally and with the service provider about any issue about the threshold, the lower thresholds, or how much time we would need to change our approach, which is the factors that influence that fee. So I don't have a great answer for you there, and Mr. McPherson might have something to add, but we have discussed the forces that might influence that fee, especially if we try to reduce the number of resources we have and actually make it cheaper for us. So I know that's not going to satisfy the question, but potentially just a bit of background detail.
Yeah. So I think Councillor Steer's question was, if I may sort of restate, is if revenues don't meet expectations, and revenues are so low that they don't cover the management fee, does the district still have to pay? And from the perspective of the contract that we would enter into, the contract is between the district and Robbins Parking, so there still would be a requirement to pay. If we're so there's kind of 2 parts to that. One is rather than the district setting this up is a capital investment of a few $100,000. So Robbins is, quite reasonably, I think, looking to recapture that investment that they have to make, and is prepared to do that over a period of time. All of that said, it's been mentioned previously that if we find ourselves in a position where this is a service that doesn't make sense for us in any number of ways, we will have the ability to we'll have an out clause. And so the RFP that we issued stated that we would have a 60-day out clause. So if we're finding that we're collecting $100, but we're spending $120, that would be a good signal for us to reconsider the service. I don't remotely expect that. Walking up and down Lynn Road, as I sometimes do, I don't think that $3 for 2 hours of parking is going to drive people away who are coming here and spending thousands of dollars on a holiday. So I'm optimistic that our price point is in a good place, that we will still have people using the service and people paying for the service in a way that will give us positive revenues that certainly justify the expense.
Thank you, Mr. McPherson. And it did you've led into the second one in terms of the option, the provision for termination in the contract that you've reiterated that we have a 60-day clause. I'm curious, is there any penalties associated with the termination of that contract? Potential termination of the contract?
So we don't have the wording finalized. We're not anticipating that at this point.
Thank you. And the third question was I'm just curious about the length of contract. I'm wondering how standard that is. It's a 3-year. Often I understand that there is what I would call a dating period to see if we like each other as much as we say we do in the initial meeting. And I'm wondering how a length of term of 3 years as an initial starting period for contract is understood to be the best way moving forward. And I don't know. It's simply a question of naivety and ignorance to understand why a 3-year term is the initial contract phase.
Through the mayor, I can start. From my interpretation and the discussions we've had with the procurement folks, that is a fairly standard clause. We have a contractor who is willing to invest time and energy and resources into setting up these types of systems, which wouldn't necessarily be recovered until a multiple years of commitment. And we feel that that's reasonable, especially considering that we have that termination clause if we did not necessarily want to keep dating, as council has put in. So I think in my limited, I have very limited experience with the execution of parking contracts, because it was in my previous role in another municipality, most of this was done in-house. But in other areas of business, we often did 3 with 2 1-year options to renew in a number of different areas.
And I just wanted, as a last point comment, I did want to touch on Mayor Law talked about some of the labor issues. And I do want to point out that we have an acute labor shortage in the community in general, and that's reflected in some of the other services that the district provides, where you're experiencing an extreme situation with not being able to provide the labor that is necessary to run the services that we presently provide. That was just a point to bring up. No question.
Thanks, Councillor Steer.
Thank you. Councillor McMaster.
Thank you. A lot of my questions have been answered. I was thinking about vandalism and signage. I was around when the parking meters were forcibly removed on Lynn Road. I was also around when no parking signs were put up on Lynn Road and they were removed. So my concern is I'm a lot more confident that the parking pay stations are pretty vandal proof, but I'm pretty confident that someone is going to try and remove these signs. And what is the process if a sign is removed and someone is still in a no parking area and it's gone over time? Does a fine stand, or do they say there is no sign?
Through the mayor right now, if the signage isn't adequate to depict the rules and regulations, then normally the enforcement rules are very limited, or the enforcement approach is very limited until the sign can be corrected. In most cases, we're only maybe a day or 2 away from that type of thing for normal sort of issues with a sign that's knocked over or backed into, or wasn't there in the first place but needs to be, so that it stands up to any encounters with dispute resolution. I would offer for council's consideration that there's a few key differences with this current offering of the program in this generation, which might affect or influence if vandalism was to be an issue or concern moving forward. The first one is the provision of a registration and free passes for local residents that would be hopefully convenient to access. The second one is the parking payment transactions can still be accomplished via a digital web-based application as well as phone calls, so that the removal of a parking pay station does not remove the pay parking transaction. It only makes it less. And then the signage and the removal of signage in this case, the third point would just be that we're not necessarily restricting or removing parking privileges. We're just putting a cost to them, which is a bit different.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I mean, coming from the UK where vandalism is rife, I often find with vandalism, it's not often for a particular grudge to bear, it's just that they can destroy something. So let's just hope that's not the case. I've expressed my disdain before that I am amazed at Howard Drive and Pownell Place is like a little oasis in the Chesterman Lynn Road area with no control. We already have the Surf Schools parking there when the Lynn and Chesterman are are fully occupied with cars. And I think you're just going to try and, we are just going to force everybody onto Howard and Pownell Place for free parking. And I really think you should consider that, because you just look at the map, it's just the one hole that's left.
Through the mayor, the previous discussions we've had with Howard included plans and intentions for 2021 residential parking only, which would include temporary residential parking permits for visiting vacation renters. We of course have talked with Surf Schools and other stakeholders about the spillover parking that happens, to borrow Councillor Thick's term, too, when Lynn Road is completely full and Cox Bay Surf might be a bit too big, so that North Chesterman becomes the attraction of choice for wave riding. We have that spillover starts on the way Lynn Road up towards the speed table, and then of course migrates back down, starting at the closest beach access point at the end of Howard, and then kind of working back towards Lynn. This contract does provide the provisions for us to expand pay parking in certain areas, as well, with the determination of when resource tipping points have to happen and more staff and enforcement hours might have to be added to the program. Based on the commitments to date, we would be in a position to monitor how many people were willing to park far away, even though there was space available nearer to the beach. I think we've all seen instances where we were surprised by the amount of the ends people would go to not pay for parking and how far they would walk. And then we've also seen, and I think been surprised by, as the CAO's previous comment, that most people are happy to pay and they just park as close as they can because convenience is actually that much more valuable than $3. So what we've done in order to mitigate here is to set what we thought were very reasonable and low rates to start, hoping not to push the problem around, and committed to monitor that. I still believe that there's some unknowns and uncertainty into how that behavior will actually come to pass. And I think if council asked me, I'd still recommend that we monitor that closely in the first several months to see if we do have a problem where we have to intervene with either more restrictions or something different along Howard as a key spot. We've talked about Tree Frog, we've talked about the highway quite a bit in our discussions as sort of the nearest free zones to the paid parking zones, and it's definitely top of mind and on our radar.
Okay, and final is more of a comment. I think it's a great parking plan. I don't think it's a perfect parking plan. I think we're going to learn a lot as we go along, but I'm a great believer in trying a 70% solution and just trying to get things off the ground. So let's just do it. Thank you.
Excellent, and thank you, Councillor McMaster and Councillor Thick. I'll just go to you in just a second. I just want to say this, two-part section here that I had dreamed up for this was the first was comments and questions about the actual report before us, and the other one was the other section I was going to open up. It was just quick comments on parking in general. The parking plan in general. So, because I do have a couple quick questions or comments to make, but Councillor Thick, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you again, Fraser, for your work. And I think I've had so many, when I've asked people what they think, just a straw poll, I've had a lot of people, somewhat surprising to me, actually give a vote of confidence. So to just add to Councillor McMaster's comment, I think it is a good way forward. And I think that just the small changes that were made at South Chesterman's, for example, are just a really good indication of people noticing, there's organization and we like what we're seeing. So I think if we can continue in that spirit, that's a good thing. Just organizing things so that people know what they're supposed to do and they are actually going to do the right thing. I think on the big picture note, what I'd like to just speak to for a minute, if I may, is something that we spoke about last meeting, which was I think if we're going to really engage with the public and get good buy-in and build public confidence in this new measure, I think that we really need to think about something such as putting some of the money that we derive from this system into recreation. Currently there's nothing, there's no revenue stream at all. And I understand that this isn't the main reason we're doing this, but I just like to float an idea out there for council and maybe the public as well, that perhaps 25% of the revenue might be considered, the net revenue considered towards a recreation facility. And that, I mean by that, is the infrastructure. And I know in your report, you did say that this would be considered in the financial plan, but knowing that that won't happen for another 6 months, I just wanted to put this idea out there and just say that this is something I think that would go a long way to building public confidence and would really add a huge measure to the quality of life in our rain-stricken Tofino. So I hope that the rest of council will just think about that over the coming months. And I would like to say that I am in agreement with the general concept. We have, as Councillor McMaster says, we have lots of details that we need to work out. And I do think that the idea of offering free parking, as well as the Tonquin Mackenzie Hellison situation, bears a little bit more thought. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thick. Any other comments for Mr. Work? Yes, Councillor Anderson, and then Councillor Steer.
Yeah, I'm very much in support of moving forward. I think Robbins offers a good contract for Tofino, and I think that they recognize the value of being here and what it means to their brand as well. I think as far as gaining support throughout the community and the visitors, it's important that, like Councillor Thick said, that people see some change and some improvements on the ground as we go through it, and also to see that the revenue is doing something, whether it goes to recreation or improving our free transit or improving our bicycle, other alternative transportation means, or improving actual parking situations, particularly like Lynn Road and the high use areas. I think those are really important factors in getting support as we move forward. I think that we're going to learn as we go through. There will be tweaking to be done, and of course there's details probably we can't anticipate at this time. I'm wondering sort of things around RV parking, large vehicles, commercial vehicles that park in some of these areas. How that'll pan out for those kind of parking users. So I think those kind of things will come up, and I'm hoping that we can be flexible and deal with them quickly when they do. Yeah. Finally, I'm a little bit worried about cell phone coverage on Cox Bay as well. It tends to be weak, and in times of high use, it can cut out. So that's another area that you might want to discuss a bit more with when you have the cell phone conversation. So yeah, that's my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Steer.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Law. Thank you once again, Mr. Works. I do just want to echo the support for moving forward in the framework that you have brought forward, and echo all the sentiments that the councillors have stated, so I won't reiterate those. And the one thing that I am looking forward to is the next phase around the village core areas and the offshore parking solutions that I'm sure will be coming forward in the year to come.
Thank you, Councillor Steer. I believe I'm left. So I do, pay parking in generally, I have a major aversion to, but I, like many people in town and most residents, I think when they see this parking plan and they know why it's being proposed and implemented, that it's necessary. and it's going to help. And I have, you know, one of the comforts that I've had is I have used Tourism Tofino's fairly detailed visitor information and data, and I do believe that the numbers presented for revenue are a little conservative, which I'm happy about. But I think that my feeling is that in a year we'll be pleasantly surprised with revenue, and that's my hope. And so that's a bit of a comfort there. I do have, you know, I have been receiving a lot of mail, a lot of conversations, and when we get into, after we make this recommendation, Mr. Work, we'll still have the ability as a council to hash out the particulars of residential getting a free, you know, a free pass, and for how long, and where that extends to. Because for me, those are actually fairly significant sticking points, and almost everybody I've talked to in the community is willing to go with pay parking for the most part, as long as residents are recognized as having free parking, and not just for the first year. And I think that's been across the board for me. And noting that we have limited amenities in the beaches is one of the big ones. And the behavior thing, I mean, I understand behavior change. A lot of residents don't go to the beach in the summer at all because they just can't. And I've had that experience myself. So just to recognize that. And also, I would also put it out there for council to think about the following, and this is where perhaps administration meets politics. And I'm just going to put this out there that that for many, many years, there's been a difficult relationship between Ucluelet and Tofino. And the last couple of years, there's been a push and a try to join the region and become you know, have a regional mindset. And I think we've been working on that. Certainly that's been one of my goals. And I do support going forward, and this is something for council to think about, extending the parking passes, same with residents to Ucluelet and other people on the West Coast. And I'm going to just say why, is that we share resources. We share a hospital. Our children go to Ucluelet for high school, and there's no other choice. So we in some ways are very connected, and we share resources. We go to the Wild Pacific Trail, and during COVID, I know that it was Tofino welcomed surfers from Ucluelet with open arms, and the message was that we're a community, and our beaches are your beaches. So I think this is where I have to make a political stand, is to think about this not only administratively but politically. I think it would be expedient to think about those things, and to think about as a region, and to think this is a way to extend an olive branch to our neighboring community in Ucluelet. And also, I think that we may get less vandalism. So anyway, there you go. That's my last pitch. I am, with that in mind, with a very strong note of caution, that's my personal stance, and I'll be very strong on that. Would somebody like to make a motion? If there are no further comments.
I can move that staff be authorized to enter a paid parking services contract with Robbins Parking Limited under terms and conditions consistent with the term sheet attached as Appendix 1 to this report for the provision of service to support beach pay parking. And that staff be authorized to bring forward amendments to Traffic and Parking Regulations Bylaw 1091, District of Tofino Fees and Charges Bylaw 1271, and District of Tofino Bylaw Enforcement and Dispute Adjudication System Bylaw 1107, 2009 to support the implementation of beach pay parking as outlined in this report.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Do we have any further comments on this topic? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Work, and Mr. McPherson for all your hard work on this and many other projects. Here's hoping. Okay. Question period. Do we have anybody signed up for questions, Ms. Best?
Through the mayor, we have no signups.
Okay, seeing no signups. If there's no objection to moving adjournment, I'd move adjournment. Seeing none, thank you all for being here and for all your hard work. Thanks again.